Okay, I'm taking a couple of recent papers to add a little bit more about how ecological response under climate change can be counterintuitive. As we have said before in other podcasts, nature makes the rules and biology finds the loopholes. There's been an example where I was involved as well to look at the impact of changes in winds in response to climate change. For example, around Galapagos, where the shape of the islands and the complicated circulation of the ocean in response to the wind changes produces a cold pool where Galapagos penguins can thrive, whereas in other places they suffer and they are now endangered species, of course. And this is paper here in Communication Biology, which is Nature franchise, is shown here, looking again in the Galapagos. Fernandina is the place here, and there is a giant tortoise. Generally, it was assumed that the giant tortoise was seen in 1906 and was assumed to have gone extinct, but now it's been seen again in 2019. So this is a map of the Galapagos archipelago indicating the approximate locations on Fernandina Island where the Chelenoides fantasticus individuals were found in 1906 and 2019. The island names are in capital letters, species names are in italics, so you can see the various species of giant tortoises. Obviously, Galapagos is famous for its biodiversity, its protected area. This is where Charles Darwin was parked for a few months with a beagle, and he was happy because apparently he used to get very seasick, and he had many of his epiphanies on these islands as well. This is the story here is very simple, that even within such a small area, why biology is become so biodiverse, and there are detailed questions about how they even got onto these islands, whether there was a land bridge or whether somehow they got carried and so on, because it's quite separated from the mainland, but it doesn't matter. The main idea is to remember that nature makes the rules. So if human beings increase carbon dioxide, nature is going to take it and produce global warming, change in winds, and whether the eastern Pacific is responding by warming less than the west or more than the west or the same as the west are questions that are raised because this upwelling here is a sink of heat from the atmosphere into the ocean. Some of it gets released during an El Nino, of course, but for the ocean to continue to take up heat under global warming, it is critical that this region warm less, so that the east-west, east-west temperature gradients are maintained and the heat into the ocean continues to be an uptake process. So just trying to make a point that all these complications together have some response in biology that we don't always understand. Often we jump to conclusions. There have been several birds and other species as well which were assumed extinct, but they were found much later, almost multiple decades later. This one is almost more than a century later, in fact. And another paper that came out is looking at how climate refugia can get formed. We will see what that means in a minute. Basically, even as changes are happening all around, specific geographical, orographical features can create protected niches of environmental variability. So what this paper did was to look at a species. By the way, here this genetic analysis shows that indeed this is a distinct species compared to all these other ones that we are looking at here in terms of Chelenoides microphase, Becky, Darwini, Don Fausti, Catamensis, undescribed, and so on and so forth. So just remember that, okay, on Fernandina. The polar bear story here is also interesting. Polar bears in general in the Arctic Circle depend a lot on sea ice for hunting and finding food. But obviously there's been a drastic downward trend in ice cover in the Arctic, and this is almost the post child for an impact of global warming that may appear soon in terms of maybe disappearance of Arctic ice in a decade or two. So this is something that's being watched. So are there any polar bears that are actually managing to survive in this so-called glacial melange, where it's not so much the sea ice, but it's the broken glacier edges onto the ocean that seem to be providing enough of a way to make a living for these polar bears, again a distinct species. So this is the data from the northeastern Greenland and southeastern Greenland region, looking at the number of species that are contributing, and you can see some of the nice images of the glacier flowing down. As you know, glacier has a rheology. It's like molasses. It flows when there is pressure or when there is a slope, and as it flows onto the ocean, forms shelf ice, and of course those are subject to ocean warming and other calving effects and so on and so forth. But you can see how they produce this mixed habitats, and the polar bear movements and habitat types were studied in this report that appeared in Communication Biology. So this is the area used for northeast and southeast Greenland polar bears based on satellite telemetry from 1993 to 2021. That's what we are looking at here. Southeast Greenland bears range over 400 linear kilometers of mountainous and glaciated coastal habitat, with over 27, almost 28,000 square kilometers, whereas northeast Greenland bears range over more than 2,000 linear kilometers of pack ice and fast ice. You can look up the definitions for those. Over 671 square kilometers. NEG and SEG are separated by about 64° north latitude, which is down here, this line, dashed line here. Fjord fast ice habitat in southeast Greenland present less than 4 months per year. Low concentration drift ice with open water on the horizon in Denmark Strait, shown here in C. So these are B and C here. D is the SEG polar bear using glacial ice as 62 north in September in 2016, end of the boreal summer. Polar bear with a fresh seal kill at 61° north in September 2016. So you can see the polar bear there and a bunch of seals, and it has a dead seal that it hunted down. So the idea is that these polar bears are managing to survive in this region, which is not full of sea ice, but it's mostly pack ice and fast ice created from glacier dynamics. They refer to this as a glacial melange habitat, mixed habitat, and this is again a genetically distinct species. These kind of studies and findings obviously have a great implication for conservation biology. There have been also corals which are doing very well in warm temperatures, whereas corals like the Great Barrier Reef are actually bleaching heavily because of global warming. So understanding the genetic differences and seeing how maybe they can be used to revive, conserve and protect species that are facing stressors from climate change parameters is very critical. So this is where the idea of climate refugia is good to get to know. This is the examples of physical basis for geographic locations likely to experience reduced rates of climate change. So even as lots of climate change is happening, This is a good example of a schematic. Topographically complex terrain creates varied microclimates and increases the likelihood that current climates will continue to exist nearby. Some examples: poleward-facing slopes and aspect result in shaded areas that buffer solar heating, particularly during low solar angles of winter and spring. This is mostly based on North American climate refugia, as they are called. There are hydrological refugia for freshwater, refugia for freshwater fish, marine fish, and so on and so forth that have been found. Okay. Cold groundwater inputs produce local cold water refuges in which stream temperature is decoupled from air temperature. So even if global warming and air temperatures are seeing an increase, if the stream temperature is decoupled, then you get a climate refuge. Areas near or in large deep lakes or oceans will warm more slowly due to high heat capacity of the water, well known. Deep snow drifts provide insulation to the surface below and provide water later in the season. Valleys that harbor cold air pools and inversions can decouple local climatic conditions from regional circulation patterns. Canopy cover can buffer local temperature maximums and minimums throughout the year. Okay, so here is another schematic which is showing some climate variability or trend in this axis, for example temperature, and this is over time. You look at habitats, so there is a moose climate niche that exists and a white-tailed deer climate niche that exists in two temperature ranges, and critical of course is that species are not evolved to live in just at one temperature, but they can tolerate obviously a range of temperatures, as you can see here. So as time goes on here, you can see, and temperatures change, the niches or habitats change, but the bottom part here changes slowly. So climate change refugia create a slow lane that enables the long-term persistence of species, communities, and ecosystems despite climate change. As the climate changes over time, both sites, depicted as blue outlined region here, okay, the habitat is getting split. You can see there is one, and then it's getting split into two, and this one is slowly drifting towards a white-tailed deer climate niche and becomes smaller and smaller for the moose climate niche. So you can see the increase in the white-tailed deer and the reduction in the moose population here. As the climate changes over time, both sites, depicted as blue-oriented polygons, ultimately transition from moose to white-tailed deer habitat. However, the bottom site transitions more slowly. By allowing resident moose to remain within their climate niche longer, the bottom site serves as a refugium for the moose. In the near term, prioritization and protection of refugial locations are key management strategies for selected focal species. In the long term, as climate changes exceed the climatic tolerances of the initial focal species, refugial locations can be managed for transition to other climate vulnerable species such as elk, symbols courtesy of integration and application network, etc. So obviously there are metrics created to define refuges, what we also refer to often as biological loopholes, how fish use various circulation features to lay eggs to make sure they don't drift away or get eaten by predators, and enough food is available, and so on and so forth. So biology in general always seems to be looking for loopholes in the rules that nature makes, whether it's nature's rules being affected by human activities or natural variability. Life always tries to find a way to survive. Knowing those strategies and how climate niches or refugia get formed can of course help us better manage and conserve species and ecosystems. Okay, so I thought I'll include this here since these two cute papers came out together in the last week. Okay.